met me yesterday. Again, thanks for inviting us, I would say, because Amit is with me, a postdoc of mine heavily involved in MatRad development, and Joao is also still with us, who will basically, to whom you had a lot of questions also about some details of the planning process, which we now kind of try to answer a little bit on the fly while we wait for computations. Yesterday, I told you about the treatment planning system and gave you installation instructions. And it might not have worked on every computer. That's okay. Like you can still basically tell Amit what went wrong. So we also get somewhat a statistics of how many people struggle with installing it. It might get more over the years, and then at some point we know we have to provide an update. But it's always difficult when you develop a research software like MatRad to have it functioning on really every computer. So we might also not be able to help everyone now if it couldn't be installed. There's just too many people of you, and the ones who managed to install it, they want to probably get on with a little bit of hands-on treatment planning right now. So that's the goal of the coming session. I guess we have 1 hour almost now until there should be an Enlight video, right? And then with a short break, then we continue until 6, so quite some time to get some to look at some treatment plans and explore some of the chance, like let's say the chances and basically problems of particle therapy in treatment planning. So we want to investigate a little bit of both. About the previous questions, as I said, I will try to answer them now while we are really doing treatment planning, because a lot of them were technical and some of them will just answer themselves when you just look a little bit at treatment plans. There was one question about materials to submit, because I think Jota said something about submitting some materials after these sessions. So there is an option from MatRad to export graphics of your planned dose distributions. And I think this is basically what you should submit afterwards. So just show what plans you created over the few exercises we go through. If you had problems installing MatRad, of course, you cannot submit anything, and that's why it's not mandatory. But you are happy to do it. Okay, then let's start looking into a few things. So Amit, while I will be talking, will be monitoring the questions. So he can also give a little bit of help. And I will quickly prepare sharing my screen. So first of all, we take a look at the timetable. And as you can see, I've uploaded a small workflow document here that I just prepared. That's the workflow I'm planning to go through. It has 3 exercises. So here you can take a look at it. That's the document. We will go through these 3 exercises. If you basically fall behind at some point, you can also then just follow these processes afterwards when you still are motivated to finish it up by yourself. You can also, if MatRad doesn't work for you or you don't want to do it hands-on, you can really just also follow me, what I'm doing, while I'm trying to explain everything. So I will go through this step by step now with my MatRad installation. And you can basically have this document open, follow me on the screen. I will always in between give you time to create your own plans or complete the steps. You also will have very different machines. Some things will work very fast on my computer, maybe slower on your laptop if it's a little bit older. So don't expect that really everything runs smooth. There's like a lot of variation in your systems, and just as a reference, treatment planning is usually done on a very heavy workstation with multiple CPUs, multiple GPUs, and you are now working with a research implementation that is flexible and should run on a laptop. So everything is a little bit is not at the full resolution that we usually use in the clinic, and it's a little bit limited. So it's not exactly what's done in the clinic, but we want to show you a little bit of the fundamental processes in treatment planning with that. Good. So that's the workflow document. Now let's go to start up our treatment planning software MatRad. I told you yesterday it's an open source system. I have installed it and have this nice shortcut on my desktop that I can run. Or basically, if you installed the standalone, you should have somewhere on your Mac in your applications folder or on the desktop of your computer or somewhere where you installed it in program files. I don't know where you exactly installed this. On Windows, it's usually installed in program files /MatRad. You can basically find this MatRad button and can run it with this. Yesterday also told you that you can install it if you have MATLAB installed, which I have. You can install it or can use it just from the code. You can download the code. So you see it's really an open source software. You can edit any code file. I extracted it into this folder and I'm just running this MatRad GUI command. If you use the standalone, just click the button and then hopefully for all of you, you get at some point, it might take really a while on the first startup because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be run in the background based on math work. So you should really end up with this picture, and I will just give you 1 minute, look a little bit at the chat if there's some obvious question to be answered. Yes, is there anything? There's like questions. There's the doc file. Some questions have been answered by me already. And if you run from MATLAB, there is no example to be found. There's really just download the code as by the instructions I gave yesterday. There's just a link to a zip and a tar file. You can just open MATLAB, go into the folder and run this command. MatRad GUI. And then basically the interface opens. So that's where we should start with. I will give like a little bit of very raw introduction about the interface. So you have some workflow buttons here that will basically get you to the most important workflow steps like loading data, calculate those, optimization, what Joao Seco told you about. And one very important button for you, if you want to export a picture, you can always use the screenshot button, not now, only when you've loaded a patient, to basically export an image of your current plan. Good. In this second field here, you see a lot of plan configuration parameters. So angles of the beams, of the couch, the radiation mode to be used, and so on. Yeah. Good. And yeah, maybe Amit, you can basically also post, if someone didn't follow the installation instructions, you can just post the link to the exact release version 2.10.1 again in the chat. That would be great because there's the installers and the code download. Good. So there basically is all of the planning parameters. It's of course a limited number of parameters. In real clinical treatment planning, you might have a lot more. You have to decide on so many things. But again, we want to keep it a little bit more accessible today. Then this field is empty. There with this field, we can later answer questions about which functions to use. I saw this question arise. We can also learn something about weight. So this will pop up as soon as we plan. And you have some visualization options, which we will not use that much, but a little bit explicit, especially this display option down here. Maybe some of these buttons to turn off something. On the right side, you have more to visualize organs, like which structures to show, which windows, how much contrast you want in your image. But yeah, that's, I think, best learned on the fly. So the first challenge will be to load the patient. So we will do everything today, keep it a little bit simpler. We'll do everything on one patient data set, which is the liver patient. So I will just load the liver patient. So if you downloaded the MatRad code, you basically, if you downloaded the MatRad code, you have in your folder, like in your code folder, there's a phantoms folder and there is a patient liver. If you did not download the code, especially on Windows, the patients are a little bit more annoying to find. I will show you soon where to find them if you downloaded the standalone, but it's always in your installation directory. So I'll try to find this now here. So give me a second and then I will share it. So if you installed it on Windows, probably it's installed in program files MatRad. So basically I can show this like here. So this is kind of I installed it, the standard installation folder is program files /MatRad, and the phantoms are within the application folder. So basically there's the phantoms folder, there's also the MatRad executable, there's the phantoms folder. And there you find all the patients and we will use the liver patient. Okay, so that's just, so I hope everybody finds the patient. While you're looking for it, for those who have already loaded it or for those who are just following along, I will already show a little bit. The first basically task after loading is namely just to explore the patient a little bit. So you see the loaded CT anatomy here. So that's a CT image. It has not super high resolution. I think that's a 3 millimeter grid. And you can scroll through it by using your mouse wheel. Or basically, if you use it on a touch computer, you can also use I think, basically your fingers for that. You can also use the slice selection down here. So basically, click these buttons down here to move the slices up and down. But that's the patient you are interested in, the liver patient here. I keep the chat open if I see something. There's a question on how to upload real patient data. That's not for today. So, but you can load DICOM files just by the button up here if you're interested. But we basically do not work with whatever is so with real patient data. So that is actually a real patient in a sense. It is a volunteer that was imaged. And it's a public data set. But in principle, you can load any DICOM data set if the DICOM tags are correctly filled. Yes, if you have other questions, please write them in the document so that Amit can basically check out that he will check out the document and provide answers there. Because otherwise I will not get through the exercises on time. There might be very much individual questions at the moment. And first of all, we want to get through the exercises. Okay, so you can explore the patient a bit. And what I like to do for this patient is at first to get rid of displaying some stuff. So for example, there is kind of a helper structure for treatment planning, which we are not interested in today, which is the dose fall off. You can look in the structure visibility right for the dose fall off and just disable it. You can click on this mark and then it just vanishes from the view. I also usually go down and unclick all these, and you basically, these are kind of also helper structures that I just do not want to see. It also helps me when I later display analysis. These basically unchecked structures will kind of not show up in my dose volume histogram, for example. Another thing that we always like to do in images is kind of change the contrast to the anatomy we are interested in. So at the moment, you don't see a lot of contrast. You see a little bit of variation in the soft tissue here, but in the liver, you are let's say, quite interested in also identifying, right, the liver through contrast. I cannot really see. I see there's some bulk here, and I think I see that it is segmented, but I could also here on the right side in the window preset, I could basically, there's a liver preset. I don't know how good it is actually, but it's, you see, it gives you a lot more contrast in the image. Yeah, so you now see a lot more structures also just by contrast. So you can see the quite bulky liver. It's really quite huge if you haven't seen it before in an CT or an MRI. It really takes up a lot of space just below the lungs. There's also the heart showing up. You see, it's a little bit, it's a mix between, goes from, let's find it again. There's the heart. Sorry, that was the wrong structure, but there's the heart showing up quite central, a little bit to the left, basically in the correct coordinate system. Here it appears to the right, but yeah, and basically what is showing up here was not the heart, it was the stomach, of course. So basically here we have the heart. Then we have also a very critical structure here, which is fortunately a bit away from the liver, which is the spinal cord. And all the structures we see here, that's what Professor Seco showed earlier with the margins and the specific types of delineations you have. There's one you do not see very nicely. This is in dark green segmented. That's the GTV. Basically, that's the gross tumor volume that one can see, for example, on an MRI quite well, something like this. Then you have the CTV, which has basically assumed some infiltration. You also see it's basically naturally bounded by the liver here. So it's assumed that this only infiltrates a little bit into the liver. And then you have the PTV, which should give you this uncertainty stability, right? It should give it a little bit, should make your plan stable against uncertainties. Yeah. So that's how the plan looks like. Now let's look at the other parameters that kind of unlocked after loading this patient. Yeah. So basically, MatRad has automatically determined an isocenter, which is usually also something you need to choose, but MatRad does this like for your simplicity automatically by just choosing the center of mass within the tumor. So this X here is basically your center of rotation for your treatment machine, basically your reference point where the machine points to. And you also see that basically this objective and constraint window, which in the end steers your optimization, has been populated with two objectives for basically prescriptions for your plan so far. Yeah, basically there's, I think Professor Seco very shortly showed these functions and their definitions in the presentation earlier. But basically this is really just a visual representation of mathematical functions. So for example, on the planning target volume, the PTV, I basically assign a squared deviation function, a least squares function. Yeah, I weight this function with a penalty value. That's how we call them. And this function measures the distance to a reference dose of 45 gray here. Yeah, so basically my target prescription could be 45 gray in the PTV. And I want to achieve this by minimizing the difference of all doses in the target to 45 gray. If this difference is 0, I have a perfectly homogeneous dose of 45 gray. There's another volume which is called skin. It's a little bit misleading. The skin is just the outer contour here. So that basically covers all the rest of the body. Yeah. And in this rest of the body, I just want to pull down the dose. I do not want to basically minimize the whole difference to 45 gray in my plan. I just want to pull the dose down below some safe value in a sense. This here is now set to 25 gray. The weight is lower, so it's less important to protect some of the uninteresting, let's say, healthy tissue than to cover the tumor. Of course, this is basically then the trade-off that was earlier talked about. So this is the very basic trade-off, healthy tissue versus tumor, right? But we cannot yet optimize. We haven't set up any plan. We haven't calculated any doses, but we will get to what's going on here. So now, with every prescription in radiotherapy, there also comes fractionation. It only makes sense to give a prescription in fractions. So we have to think about what is sensible. I don't know if there was already a liver session, and I'm really also not a doctor. So everything I say about clinical prescription can be completely nonsensical. But for example, in liver, you might be quite interested in doing a hypofractionated treatment. And you use less fractions and higher fraction doses. So what I would do, and it also makes it easier to analyze those per fraction now, is just change the number of fraction as your first plan parameter to 15 fractions. This would now mean we try to give 45 gray to the tumor in 15 fractions. And now you can calculate how much gray per fractions this is. So 45 gray in 15 fractions is 3 gray per fraction to the tumor. It's not a very much hypofractionated treatment, but yeah, it's 3 gray per fraction is still a dose that we can also later put into our biological models. Going to higher doses makes biological modeling a little bit complicated. So let's keep with this. It's kind of easy to divide this 45 gray by 15. And now we start setting up our plan. So I know this is a particle therapy school, but we want to also compare a little bit to photons, and some of you might already be some of you may already be familiar with photon therapy a little bit. So let's start with creating a very simple photon plan in MatRad. And if you look into the exercises, so just give me a second, I pull them also up and put them to the side here, so I do not skip anything that's written there. So basically, after setting this number of fractions to 15, that's the third step in the exercises, we start to configure, which is also in the third step, a treatment plan. So we won't do VMAT now in MatRad, like we won't do arc therapy, because it's probably too much to compute for the computers it's now installed on. So we will do step and shoot IMRT. It's still kind of still oftenly used. So in step and shoot IMRT, we often, or like one option is to choose equidistant beams. So you can choose 5 to 9 beams. I think 9 is still manageable by most of the laptops and computers I assume are used. But if you are a little bit unsure how fast your computer is, maybe stick with 5. You can then also just stick with the example angles here, or you can take 9 or 7 angles, but then you have to calculate what the equidistant, what the distance between these angles should be. I will basically do it with 5 angles. So in MatRad, it's not very user-friendly in this regard. Again, it's a research software, but you can just type the gantry angles that you're interested in into basically this field. So you just click into this gantry angle field, which is in this plan widget. There are some other parameters which I'm not going to discuss right now, but we can discuss them later. And I just type my 5 beam angles. So there's one coming from 0 degree, one from 72 degree, and so on. And we all space them in 72 degree intervals. And I also have to add 5 0 degree couch angles. We do not look at couch angles today. That's a little bit unintuitive in the display we have. And so we just look at gantry angles. And just to understand what gantry angles mean, like you can basically start typing these in. Basically, you can look at this button, which is down here in the visualization part. There's among these few buttons, there is visualize plan beams. And if you click this, you kind of see what gantry angles mean. So 0 degree means beam basically coming from the top, and then you rotate around the patient. So for photon IMRT devices, they all have a gantry usually. For protons or ions, like the gantry situation might not be that easy. In protons, like you need to have a machine that has a gantry. Usually you have also static beam lines, so you might only be able to come from 90 or 270 degree in this case and need to work with couch rotation instead. But we assume we have a gantry available. We assume we have like a giant facility that has built a gantry. And yes, so regarding the question, please type the question into the Google Scholar, and Amit is trying to help you. I'm basically just continuing for everybody else who is not a question. Amit will basically tell me if there's like a very pressing question that needs to be answered. So just to remind you. Okay, good. So this is the gantry angle here. Yeah. So we can rotate around the patient. We have set 5 equidistant angles, so we get this nice star-shaped beams. That's how often now these setups are called in IMRT, like it's a star-shaped 5-beam setup or something like this. You can already see it might not be the best choice of angles, just doing it equidistantly, because we directly go through the heart and we go to the spinal cord. So maybe not the best setup, but we just do this photon treatment plan for reference. So we just go for it now. So when you have set this all up, you can basically go to step 4 on this exercise sheet, which is start dose influence calculation. Yeah. So this is basically done by clicking this button here, the Calc Influence MX. In the next version, it means we calculate the dose influence matrix. The dose influence matrix basically computes for each beamlet, so for each subpart of your beam, it computes a dose. And this dose is normalized. So basically, in a sense, this just computes open fields, which you then can modify. There was this question in the Google Doc earlier. What does this vector W mean? That's basically the vector that you can multiply with this matrix to get a dose. It's like a mathematical concept. So you store for each subpart of your beam, you store a dose, and this you can multiply later with a number to change its intensity. I can explain this after the plan is optimized. So at the moment, we do not have computed a 3-dimensional dose image. We have in the background computed a matrix that allows us, just by changing the weight of individual beamlets, to create or to display a treatment plan. Yeah. If this calculate influence matrix step fails, the most likely reason for this is that you have not set the same number of gantry and couch angles. Then MatRad will complain. Okay, so as said, we don't have a dose yet. We only have a matrix in the background. So now we optimize. I will just click that and use this. Well, it takes a little, then you will get a pop-up that basically shows you how a function decreases. And this is now kind of, I will explain a little bit what is going on here. So what the treatment planning system does now, it builds, let's maybe just first of all take this back. So what the treatment planning system did is it basically compiled these 2 rows here into a function. Like the first of the function multiplied 300 with all the quadratic differences basically that are positive above 25. So try to reduce the dose in the whole body below 25 gray. And it added this term to it, basically 1000 times the quadratic difference to 45 gray in the target. So this function, if it becomes smaller, will get a homogeneous dose in the target and will try to reduce the dose between 25 gray. And you see that's what the optimizer did. It started at some point, didn't seem very good, very high value Y, and then it kind of reduced this. And if you paid attention in the lecture earlier, it basically computes the gradient. So it tries, this is a quasi-Newton method. It computes the gradient, looks down the gradient, then it computes the second derivative to estimate the curvature of the derivative a bit better, and takes then a very good guess on how to step down the function. And it repeats this, repeats this until it comes to a region where it cannot really go down much further. And this means it's at the minimum. What does a Newton method actually do? So the Newton method does what you maybe did in high school. It basically tries to find the minimum of a function by finding the root of the derivative. That's what the Newton method does. It tries to find the root of a function. And this root is found of the derivative is found with the second derivative. And the quasi-Newton method does not compute the full second derivative, it just approximates it. That was also a question before. So, okay, so that's what happened. And now basically what the optimizer has computed is how to shape your beams to get a nice homogeneous dose in the target. Yeah, and this modulation that you see here, like basically there's a little bit less dose from here, but a little bit more dose from here. Here's a little bit less dose from here, but a little bit more dose from here. So this modulation is encoded in this W that Professor Seco introduced earlier. It's this vector that contains the intensities at multiple points of the beam. And I don't know what you think, how many free parameters there are, but for photons, for this step and shoot IMRT plan with 5 beams, it's probably a few hundred, little bit more than 1,000 maybe, of free parameters that were chosen by the optimizer to compute the dose. Yeah, and you see, despite us only using a trade-off between PTV and all of the remaining tissue, we actually seems like a somewhat okay plan. We have low doses in the entrance regions of the beams. So in principle, this is also a question that was asked earlier. So basically the blue means low dose, then we go to higher doses here until red, which is the highest dose, and the prescribed value is 3 gray. So you have now created your first photon plan. And so what you can do now, if you are going to submit your results of this hands-on planning, you can find in the top this this button here, which looks like a camera. It was in very tedious work, handcrafted by myself to look like this. So it looks like this tiny camera, and you can click it, and then you basically get this save button. You can just give it a name, photon plan, and save it, and then it saves the photon plan. Yeah, current view has been successfully saved. You just saved this plan. You can also take a closer look by using the zoom button. So then you can, if you click or activate the zoom view, you can like zoom in a little bit. You can draw this box, and then you basically can take a closer look on your plan. I like to deactivate this visualization of the beams as well. It looks like a very homogeneous dose, well covering the PTV. There's a little bit of dose reaching into the heart, but that's kind of the trade-off. Yeah, physical dose distributions have penumbras. They have like smooth gradients. They cannot fall extremely sharp. Just physical constraints of the irradiation used. So there will be some dose reaching into the heart, and that needs to be decided how much does the heart tolerate, especially maybe exactly at this region. And also here you have some dose going through the spinal cord, so you need to look up in a clinical, like in some study on toxicity, how much dose does the spinal cord tolerate. The spinal cord, for example, is very sensitive to local high doses. It's a serial organ. Basically, one part of the spinal cord is irradiated with too high dose. Everything below this point will fail. Yeah, so that's not a good thing. The liver, on the other hand, is quite a parallel organ. I would say, for example, that you can take out parts of your liver and the rest still works. So that's differences also in what doses can tolerate, and that's quite a biological and clinical decision that has to be done from evidence that you have collected on toxicity over the years. Okay, so that's how the photon plan looks like. And before we go to particles, I think then we also have a nice cut before we move to the particles after the break. We will make this plan a little bit more complex. So we will now design a little bit more complex function to minimize. And that's a big part of, let's say, it was a very big part of treatment planners' jobs. So treatment planning systems try to automate this more and more. Professor Seco taught about this navigating the Pareto surface and so on. So you try to make this process more streamlined. But in principle, at the moment, we do not recognize, I need to get rid of my zoom view here. Our treatment plan does not care at all about the hard dose in particular. It basically just generally in all the rest of the tissue tries to minimize dose below 25 gray. So first of all, this part of the function here, it kind of really only minimizes down to 25 gray. So it tries to pull below 25 gray, and then it doesn't care anymore. Everything that's up to 25 gray is completely irrelevant to the objective function at the moment. So the optimizer can place 25 gray divided by 15. So you end up with something around 2 point something. So it can place this value here, and this would have no effect on the objective function. So the optimizer is free to distribute dose in a sense. That shouldn't be a goal. So we need to add something that additionally just tries to reduce dose as much as possible. One option to do this, for example, is to minimize the mean dose as much as possible. So what we can do as a first modification, we can go to this objectives and constraints window. That's basically step 6 now in the exercise view. So we can go there and just add to the skin. So that's all the remaining tissue. We can add an objective. So now we get a second one. By default, it's also a squared deviation, a squared overdosing objective, minimizing all quadratic differences above a value with some penalty to it. So we can change this to become a mean dose objective. That means we want to minimize mean dose. Especially if this parameter here is 0. So we do not modify this. We keep this by with 0. And this is basically, let's say, a little bit less important for us than avoiding high doses in the tissue. So it shouldn't have the same importance here. This is what this penalty means. So we just give it importance of 100. So that I use 100, 300,000 here and not 1310 is basically, it doesn't matter. It's just like something I grew up with in developing treatment planning stuff. So that's kind of something that I can work with. So 300, 100,000 is the important thing is the relative meaning of these penalties. What are the relative to each other? So 1,130. So getting the dose as low as possible is a little bit less important than avoiding hotspots in the healthy tissue. And this is less important than covering the target. So basically we kind of have a hierarchy of importance there in what we're going to do. So, but also what you see, we have 3 kind of special organs here, right? We have the spinal cord, we have the liver where our tumor is actually in. We also don't want to overdose this necessarily. And we also have the heart. So we can kind of also make our treatment plan more focused on sparing the heart, liver, and spinal cord. So you can do this by adding additional functions. So for example, let's start with putting something on the liver. So I'll add an objective to the liver. And now again to the question earlier, how do I select what kind of function do I provide here? So just to disclose that I'm not a treatment planner in practice. So, and all these functions evolve, but the idea is always motivated by how is this organ behaving? Is it the organ where the tumor is actually in or in the vicinity? So for example, it wouldn't make sense in the liver to put now a maximum dose constraint for 5 gray per, like in the total, or basically 0.1 gray per fraction, because the optimizer cannot achieve or cannot sensibly achieve that, because there will always be a slightly high dose fraction around the tumor within the liver, right? And the other thing is, I said the liver is a somewhat parallel organ. So I can tolerate some large doses, but for a parallel organ, I want to make sure that on average, the dose is quite low. So I can tolerate high doses, but I want to push down the mean dose as much. So for the liver, it might make sense to use a mean dose objective as well. And for example, I give it just like the same importance now as I have on the rest of the hot spots in the skin. Yeah, it's kind of just a relative importance value. We will not spend too much time on really deciding what's the best option here, since this is all kind of simulation and we are all not real treatment planners. But this is basically how you start to make decisions on which organ is the most important. I will also add something to the spinal cord. Where's the spinal cord? There it is. Nice. So I will add something here. Yeah, what is going on here? So spinal cord is a serial organ. So what is important to push the low dose below, or push or pull down the maximum dose? Like this is very important. If I do not want to violate the tolerance dose of the spinal cord, so there, for example, a squared overdosing objective could make sense, or even a hard dose constraint, like a maximum dose constraint. But I do not want to work with constraints today because they, as Joao Seco said, they are quite difficult in optimization, which also means they need more runtime. Yeah, they need more computations. So I really want to basically keep this simple on your laptop. So I basically say, yeah, spinal cord, I want to keep this below 15 grays over the whole treatment. So basically less than 1 gray per fraction. Yeah, that is this is where I want to pull down towards. Yeah. And as a last thing, I basically make a combination of both on the heart. Yeah. So I basically try to avoid very high doses in the heart. So it should, if possible, not go above 30 gray in 15 fractions. So if possible, don't go above 2 gray per fraction. We will see that this will create a conflict here at this interface between PTV and heart. So we will see how the tumor handles this. But in addition, like also try to minimize the mean dose. So, and you see with this, you basically can more and more change the complexity of your treatment plan. This liver geometry is now quite nice, but just think about a head and neck case where you have 2 different prescription levels, 2 different types of targets, then 2 parotid glands, an optic system, an eye, like the optic nerves, the eye, the lenses, the brainstem, and so on. You see there's like this list of objectives can become very long. Usually you have kind of a protocol or a class solution that you can already load and then just need to tune, or like let some automated planning strategy work on that for a while. But that's all very computationally challenging. And so that's why we work with this weighted approach for today. But that's in principle how you build up your treatment planning problem. And the optimizer will always translate this into a function that needs to be minimized. Yeah. Before we can optimize this, there's one more thing that you usually need to decide on, and that's actually not that trivial. It's something that I often also not discuss in these courses, but you need to decide what overlaps what. Basically, often you need to say, okay, my PTV, if I now would basically have an optimization functions on the PTV and on the heart, you see they overlap here. Yeah. So if I don't decide on an overlap, my functions will kind of conflict with each other in the same voxel. And usually you do not want to have that. You basically want to say for the optimizer, the PTV overlaps the heart and the heart overlaps the rest of the tissue. So basically that the functions get applied to their regions. So for example, in what you see here, there's this button, the overlap priority, smaller number overlaps higher number. So the PTV overlaps apparently the skin, so the remaining tissue and all the other organs, but it seems like there's no overlap classified between heart and skin. So basically in the heart, there would be now multiple functions active, namely those from the heart and those from the skin. So what I can just do is I can make the heart basically send it to the background, the skin basically send it to the background, and now it gets overlapped by all organs. Yeah, that's a little bit something that sounds trivial or whatsoever, but it's actually kind of can give you real headaches in an optimization problem if these overlaps are not nicely defined. And of course, this is much more difficult when you now have to assign biology to tissue. So the PTV, should that be target tissue, and or should that be should this have which alpha beta ratios should be applied there, and so on. So overlaps are quite a tricky thing. Good. Okay, so now I have this big optimization problem. Maybe you have done this a little bit differently. That's nice. Maybe your plan will look better than mine after this. Maybe your plan will look worse. You will submit it. But let's just optimize this plan again. So after setting all these parameters, we can just optimize. Yeah. So let's do that. I will now optimize. And it will take a while. And then this image will pop up again. And you know, it looks a little bit different than before. So if in the optimization run before, yeah, it seemed like the dose was much faster converging. Our problem was very simple. There was only a conflict between remaining tissue and target. Now we have multiple things conflicting with each other. Yeah, so finding the optimum might not be that easy. Actually, my plan looks very bad. Yeah, I think I changed something to the plan I did before. So what you see here, it seems that I put so much on sparing the heart, yeah, that it basically tries to send all the dose from here. Also sparing the normal tissue seemed to be very challenging to the optimizer. So now I have actually a very bad plan because I had such a high emphasis on sparing dose in the heart. So let me quickly check how can I make this better. Yeah, what could I do? I could, for example, also allow a little bit more liver mean dose now again. What can I do in the heart? Yeah, for example, in the heart, I could be a little bit less focused on the mean dose. So let's make the mean dose in the heart a little bit less important. I will just give it 50. So it not focus so much on minimizing the dose in the heart, and I re-optimize. So you can play around with this a little bit. I will just do one more plan now, but you can play around with it afterwards if you're interested. Create some new doses. So again, the optimization, the development of my objective function looks different. Sometimes I get the question why it makes these jumps. That's basically a feature of the interior point method used here. Basically, it always tries to keep the beam fluences positive while optimizing, and then sometimes it can make these jumps. This also doesn't look much better. This morning I managed a much better plan. Let me think what I can do. The heart can, let's basically remove the mean dose on the heart. I think the mean dose on the heart is quite challenging. Maybe this is also quite challenging. Let's maybe make this a little bit relaxed. I'm just basically playing around a little bit with the objective, and you can do the same. Try to make this look a little bit more like without the many hotspots in the tissue. Yeah, and you see already relaxing this conflict and removing the mean dose objective in the heart made the optimization problem much easier for the optimizer to solve. So we're a little bit back to the plan before. So yeah, that's basically the trouble of treatment planning in general. You have these trade-offs, and these trade-offs can annoy you. And modern methods try to automate this problem of finding these weights and assigning these protocols much easier. Good. So one thing that you can do if you have found a plan, you can take a screenshot for the current dose or profile plot. Again, basically with this, can name it Photon 2 and save it. So that's something that you can submit. Yeah, what you can also do is you can look at statistics and the dose volume histogram. Yeah. So if we open this, if we click on show, basically the dose volume histogram you can show here. I think it's also described in the exercises. Then you get this plot of dose volume histograms. Professor Seco showed them earlier. So targets always optimally look like a box that reaches up to the prescribed dose, which is 3 gray per fraction. And organs at risk are as much as possible in the lower left corner. That's what you basically want to achieve. Good. So before we go into the short 15-minute break, I want to do one last thing with you. Professor Seco made the point about uncertainties. Yeah, and he showed a little bit uncertainties photons versus uncertainty of protons. So you see we have this margin here. So the PTV, this violet thing, violet contour is a margin around the CTV. This should basically get us safe in terms of uncertainty. Yeah. So let's check if it really does that. Then later we make the comparison to particles for this. Yeah. So first of all, this is the last step of the first exercise in the exercise sheet. We basically simulate a patient shift now by shifting the isocenter. So the isocenter is your reference point for your treatment planning system. If you shift that, you basically simulate that the patient has shifted. So let's simulate an isocenter shift. We can do this by unchecking this auto box next to the isocenter field here. So we can click that. This is now basically free to edit for us. And I will be quite generous with the shift because we want to see something, right? So let's really give it a 5 millimeter shift in X and Y direction. So X and Y directions are both of the directions you see here on the X and Y, like basically on this image slice. So let's just go to move the isocenter to 270.8. So I just added 5 millimeter there. And here on the Y coordinate, let's move it to, if we add 5, let's move it to 301.7. Then to basically activate this, I just click out of the field. And this means now my isocenter has shifted. So you see it quite nicely here after scrolling a little bit. The isocenter is now a little bit shifted, means the patient has shifted in the other direction. Yeah, but it has the dose that has not yet been recalculated. You can recalculate the dose, not by the same way you did before with calculate, influence matrix, and optimize. So you want to recalculate the plan. So you just click on this recalc button up here. So this will recalculate the dose for this isocenter shift. So I will just do that. Hope it doesn't throw any errors, but MatRad doesn't seem to disappoint me today. So it now recalculates the dose. You always get this weight bar. And we have a shifted dose. You just saw it probably quite quickly. The dose is now shifted. Let's zoom a little bit. Maybe your computers are still calculating, while that you can follow me. So the dose seems to be shifted. It's shifted down here because the isocenter has shifted down here. It's shifted a little bit into the heart, which is not nice, but the dose is still quite homogeneous. Shifted a little bit, but it's still quite homogeneous. This looks a little bit darker, but that's only because there's lung behind. So basically, let's remove the isoline. So this is actually quite homogeneous. The plan has a little bit shifted, but you also see that the CTV here is actually still quite nicely covered. So our small margin here has kept us safe against the shift. We shifted a little bit, but our margin has kept us safe. So we can take a look at this as well. Let's do this a little bit more quantitatively. Let's show the dose volume histogram for this. So let's click at the dose volume histogram. Takes a while to compute, and it shows this behavior real nice. I will basically try to show both side by side. So here are both dose volume histograms I just had. So the right one is the shifted. The left one is the unshifted plan. So the photons behave, the margins work exactly as you want them to work. Yeah, so on the left one, my CTV here, which is the blue one, is very nicely covered. It's a very steep line at the 3 gray prescription. And here it is still quite a steep line. It's a little bit compromised, but not much. It was a 5 millimeter shift. I think what we had was a 4 millimeter margin. So it's really it very well manages the shift. Yeah. What you see is the PTV is now not covered that well, but that's not what the PTV shouldn't be covered anymore that well when you shift. It's the PTV is there to cover the CTV under a shift, under uncertainty. So the shift, the margin works very nicely. What you see though is that the hard dose volume histogram, it's not that visible or that easily visible. It shifts a little bit to higher doses. I think, let's see if we can, we see that the mean dose of the hard here it's 0.7 gray per fraction. Here it's a little bit higher. The maximum doesn't increase that much because it already was quite close to the PTV. But in principle, like you see, if you look here, there has been a little bit of shift towards higher doses in the heart. So that couldn't be, we shifted into our isocenter closer to the heart. So it was a little bit clear that it will get a little bit more dose. But the margin itself works as expected. And that's basically the introduction to the treatment planning with photons from my side. I know this might have been a little bit fast, but I had a little bit less time and wanted to get through the photons in the first session. So I hope you got a first impression. And in the next session, after a short break, we will discuss how protons behave in the same setting. So we will basically reuse our setup for protons. And then we will check out carbons as well and see what biological dose means. So I hope you were able to follow me and create some nice or somewhat fine looking treatment plans. Maybe they are as bad as my first plan. Maybe they were directly much better than my plans. But yeah, let's in the next session have fun with protons and carbon ions. That's why we are all here. So thanks for listening and following along for the first session. And yeah, I will probably take some time to look in the Google Doc now and hope it's not full of questions, but let's see. And keep your MatRad open so we can directly continue here, and see you back in 15 minutes, I guess, right?